Hello, everybody. My name's Jenny Luscombe, and this is my friend Celeste. And I'm starting to make some videos with the community around me of people that are awakening or already awake. I wanted to talk to Celeste today because she's got loads of interesting things to say, and she's a creative. And most of the people that I know are healers or kind of in that kind of world. So I'm starting to pull together all these people from all around the world that I know. And one of my main goals here is to showcase people's excellence, because it's what works in the world, and interdependence is the opposite of narcissism. And if we could all be for each other as opposed to against each other, the world would be a happier place. So when we take actions like this, we're moving towards more of what we want to see in the world. So I'm thinking about the microcosm and the macrocosm. If I, in my small way, can connect with community and then connect them with community, then I'm moving in the right direction for myself and everybody else. So I'll just hand over to you, Celeste. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your upcoming projects and your creative stuff?
My wild creative life. Hi, everybody. I'm Celeste Ramos. I am a writer and voiceover from New York City. I'm in New York now, though I usually pogo stick around the world, as I call it. And yeah, where do I start? I usually write magical realism and poetry for the two genres I work in the most. And in magical realism and actually in psycho thrillers as well on the fiction side, those two genres are ones that I love very much because they always deconstruct what we've got in front of us. It's not necessarily so like hyper real in the way of like Jenny and Celeste are talking on a camera about life and awakening, but like actually what would happen if we were having this conversation sitting on a bridge over a giant pedestrian crossing in Tokyo? Or what if we were having this conversation on the moon? Or what if we were having this conversation in a garden in a foreign country neither of us have been to? Like just really changing how you look at the world based on tiny shifts of perspective. And I think that applies to definitely our spiritual growth in a time when things are so horrendous for so many people and such a puzzle too, to try to figure out. So one of the ways that I hope I'm helping people is by writing about different worlds, different people, different circumstances, in a way that's attractive and appealing and different enough to make people find a commonality between what they're reading, even if it's a completely foreign circumstance. But I think that always works somehow to create some kind of togetherness. That's my giant artist statement.
I love how you called that genre magical realism, because that's just like strikes. It's like a bell just went off in my head. Because have you heard of the gene keys? I might have talked to you about that before, but one of the gene keys is brings the gift of realism. And Richard Rudd, the guy who innovated the gene keys, like he describes magic as realism. And I definitely think that in the world, we are slowly moving kind of, from logic to magic, from the left brain to the right brain. So magical realism, I was just like, wow, like I've never even heard of that genre. And it just makes sense to me, like every cell.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful genre. It's really fun. It started in Colombia, I want to say in the 1900s. maybe, or it might be a little bit older than that, maybe the late 1800s, but I'm sure if someone knows better, they can correct me. Off the top of my head, I want to say it was in the 1900s, but yeah, there's a lot of this like interplay between the natural world, you know, what you consider. It's like it's similar to fairy tales, you know, where you open a door, what you think is your closet door, and it's actually like the door to Narnia, you know, and just imagining like if you could escape your crazy home situation, if you could just actually leave everything behind, like so many of us want to do sometimes, and just kind of fall through a hole in the ceiling, like what would that look like?
Mm.
Um,
And so
yeah.
some of us have been forced to leave everything behind.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But you know, it doesn't look pretty when you're forced to do that.
No,
Um,
no.
I'm sure many people watching this can identify with that because, like, you know, the energy at the moment has been doing all sorts of things to people's lives that they could never possibly have predicted.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely crazy. Um, yeah, so I like how you're going into people's life stories and life lessons because like that's kind of what it all is. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't most people don't want to hear that. It's a
Yeah.
lesson. Oh,
Well,
goody.
that's kind of the thing. Like I have two projects that are coming up. That one of them I'm submitting for funding for a couple of programs here in the States. A few of them are international, but it's basically taking um, 21 places where I've been to or lived. So I wasn't kidding when I said I pogo stick, but I lived in a lot of places. I've moved for many reasons. But I've always been someone who has had very bizarre, happenstancey kind of luck when it comes to moving and the people I've met and just the things that have happened to me in such different locales. And I started moving around when I was like 22. Actually, no, when I moved to college, because I grew up in New York, I went to school in Wisconsin. And that move alone was like this really crazy thing. But I went in part because a bunch of my friends went to an art school in the Midwest, and I love this art school, and it was so fun. So I was like, all right, I'll try it. And it was like living two completely different lives for 4 years because I was living in the country for part of the year, in the city the other. And then I moved to the West Coast, I moved to Europe. I've been to Mexico, I've been to a bunch of places, and everywhere I've been to has taught me something, either about myself as far as like what I can tolerate and what I can deal with from other people, or how I can help random people that I meet. Like there have been people that I've met who've been in an accident out of nowhere who literally have fallen at my feet. There have been people who have been like super lost because they got really drunk in Las Vegas and couldn't find their friend, and so I ended up hanging out with them and we became friends. Like it's just these like funny little ways that we'll interact or meet people, or on planes or literally on trains or in hospitals. And the things that I've learned about what people are looking for, you know, where like you may leave your house and think, oh, I'm going to go out and have a great time with my friends, or oh, I'm going to go get this routine medical exam and end up being admitted to the hospital, or oh, I'm going to go do this with my life and start all over again, as what happened to me, and end up repeating a certain number of patterns and heavy things because I wasn't actually paying attention to what was propelling me at the time. There's all these different ways that a place will kind of turn on you and show you something.
Mm,
And I think that speaks to like, you know, that project, writing these different essays about all these experiences reflects a lot of what's happening, you know, to come back to the micro macro, is like everything that's happening in the world right now is so difficult and so explosive in a way because everything is being revealed. Like there's nothing that's necessarily new, because so many of the scandals even right now is like, oh, so and so took a bribe, or this person that's running for office turns out to have some horrible online persona. There's this other government has been paying off this other one. Like, there's none of these celebrities or politicians or even everyday people are doing anything neither of us have heard of. But it's in the fact that there's a lot of like reap what you sow kind of revelations happening. And what I'm hoping is that eventually people will get off of the, oh my God, so and so did this, and say, why did they do it? Because like replacing somebody isn't necessarily it. It's like what gets us to the point where we were stomaching the things we were stomaching the whole time, you know, and what was it that we were looking for when we moved to whatever place it was? Why did we choose this city to go have a good time? You know, like what's behind all of it? So that's what I'm always after in the
I
writing.
couldn't agree more, because like you hear of like awful things that happen, like somebody goes crazy with a gun in a school and kills everyone, and you listen to the reporting afterwards, and then you know the the president or the prime minister will stand up and go, oh, you know, that guy's a moron, and you know why, you know, who are these people, and we need justice and all of that. And like I remember a journalist wrote about, I can't remember which incident it was or what happened, but um I read an article where a journalist covered the life of one of the people that did that.
Mm.
Um, and it was a classic, like somebody from a war-torn place had watched his family get murdered and traveled all the way across Europe to get to a different place to live, and you know, had suffered and suffered and suffered like a million different ways. And I read it and I thought, if all of that had happened to me, then I might have gone crazy with a gun. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like the fact that people can do that and they get to that point is really devastating. And sort of being a therapist as well, like I know that that comes from emotional neglect, like that comes from not existing, like not being allowed to exist, you know,
Mm.
not feeling heard or seen, or and like you
Mm.
say, kind of like just bumping into the people on the train. And sometimes those are like the most deep magical experiences, because like you haven't got any, there's no history, that there isn't any expectation, you're just in this kind of zone, and sometimes things go really differently, and and afterwards you feel kind of amazing. It was just like, oh my God, you know, when I left the house this morning I didn't think that I would have that learning experience, or that like really intense sense of connection or whatever. And then most of those times you never see that person again, do you? Because it's kind of like, oh, should we swap
Yeah.
numbers? Like, just wouldn't be appropriate, because then the magic would almost be gone.
Yeah.
But,
And you know, I'm sorry, what? I cut you off.
no, carry on.
Oh, yeah, but no, there's so many people that like I remember I used to be really afraid to fly. And when I was going back and forth between New York and Wisconsin, I'd always take the train, and it's like a 19-hour train ride from New York to Chicago, and then there's a bus that takes you to the town where my school was. And on that train, I would meet like there was a kid that I still think about to this day whose parents had divorced, and he his one of his parents was from Connecticut, the other one was from Texas. And so he had to go live, I think it was his dad that was from Texas, and he had to go live with his dad. So he was taking the train in this like roundabout way to get down to Texas. And I had never seen the Midwestern sky before because I grew up in a city. So like I've never seen the like giant, you know, American sky with like the cornfields at the bottom. Like we don't get this massive sky view in the city. And so when we got to like, I think it's Indiana in the morning, and I was just glued to the window. And if you're from most other places in the States, you probably think I was absolutely out of my mind because I'm like, the sky. And it was like you could see how the clouds, you can kind of see the curve of the earth in the distance, you know, in the way that the clouds were the way that they were seated way out. It's like stuff that you just can't see in an urban setting. And I was like kind of hiding my fascination because I was like, I'm sure I look like I'm absolutely not. So I'm just like staring out this train window, and the kid that I was talking to turned out to really he wanted to be a meteorologist. And so he was like telling me all this stuff about the cloud formations that we were seeing, and like was having his like quiet nerd moment with me because he was like, I never tell people this stuff, but there's like, okay, so that cloud that you see over there is blah blah blah. But you know, it's one of those things where I was like, oh, that's interesting, oh, that's cool, whatever. But later on, like a good year later, where he told me about like what cloud is going, it looks like it's just going to stay puffy, but it's actually going to become a giant thunderstorm, came in handy this one time that I was out, because a couple of my friends and I were like out hanging out in the field or something, which is what you do in the country in some places. And I was like, there's a storm coming, we should go. And my friends were like, why? I'm like, that, I promise you that is going to turn into whatever, because I remember what he said. And so they're like, okay, whatever. And we left, and sure enough, like half an hour later, it became a tornado even, but it didn't hit us. But yeah, it was it
That's
was
amazing.
crazy.
And I
Yeah.
love how you listened to him and he felt heard by you. And then you went
Yes, yeah.
that, and he probably went away like buzzing because he probably doesn't normally get the
Yeah,
opportunity
yeah.
there in that way. But yeah, like it's always so beautiful that there is always a reason. There's always a reason. And when I look back on my life before I knew that, like, I'm so glad that I don't believe in random chaos anymore.
Hmm.
And even,
Hmm.
obviously it feels like random chaos right now in the world. But we know it isn't.
Hmm.
We hope it isn't. Um, but yeah, beautiful. So, um, is there anything that you want people to know about you specifically, or anything that you've got coming up that you'd like to share?
Mm. Um, well, I have a lot of stuff that's generally out. Right now I'm in, as many of us are, in a giant transitional phase, so I don't have anything coming up as yet. Apart from just what I'm writing. The essay collection is called Deserting the Empire, and it's kind of like a continuation of the first essay that I had professionally published in 2016, and that was an essay that I had written about living as a New Yorker in other places, because I always grew up going, why does everybody want to come to New York? It's
Mm,
so famous for like everybody else from all over the world wants to come to New York. And it's like, well, what the hell's happening in other places that nobody wants to be there anymore and they want to come to New York? Like, it's great. It's cool. I love that I grew up in like a different dimension compared to the rest of the states. New York is its own world, but I was always like, okay, what's out there, and I was so curious just about the rest of the world. And so everywhere you go as a New Yorker, people react to you so differently. And there's a lot of people from other big cities that are kind of like, all right, whatever. I've met people from like other cities who absolutely hate us because they think that we think that we're the best ever. We really don't. I want to settle this horrible this stereotype
mhm.
once and for all. We just have our particular way of doing things. And it is a very different city compared to other ones, but there is like this thing where you think New York is like everywhere else until you actually leave it. So that's why I always tell people, if you grow up here, leave New York, because the rest of the world is just as unique, but it's not. We don't have to be the same everywhere we go. And anyway, but it was about like they call New York State the Empire State. And so that's why I called it Deserting the Empire. But the essays as a collection is also about just leaving yourself. If you treat yourself as like your grand dominion and your empire, it's like, how do you desert yourself for better or for worse? For better or for worse, excuse me. So if you leave, like when I got married, I left the States to move to Norway, And I had never been to Norway in my life. And I had obviously lived my whole life in the States, and I had to become a very different person to survive in a new culture, and that's what you have to do. And so it's, it's stories that are as big as that. It's stories that are as small as like getting up and auditioning for doing a voiceover for the first time in my life, which is what I do professionally now. And just really using my life as a way to teach something to people. And I don't like to be what I call hokey about it, and that my lessons aren't always about, oh, at the end of the day, you have to love yourself, or, whatever. Like, it hurts. It sucks. Things are confusing. They're aggravating. Sometimes they bump you 12 steps backward, where you're just like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I've thrown my hands up so many times about, like, screw spiritual enlightenment. I'm going to go to the bar, like, just really. But even stuff like that still has its way of steering you in a particular direction, because you may go to the bar pissed off and get yourself drunk, but then you meet somebody who
Yeah.
has this conversation with you, So it's about that, and that's what I'm working on. And I do voiceover as well. I'm always looking for voiceover work, especially for meditation, mindfulness recordings, anything about I love doing narration, so like documentaries about ancient places, spiritual places. I've always wanted to do one about ancient Egypt, because that's a culture that's dear to me. I follow loosely, but I follow Kemetism as a religion, only loosely because there's a lot I still have to learn, and I keep getting sidetracked. But whatever. um, but yeah, so those are my interests, and what I hope to accomplish in my work.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you've just had such a rich life and you've
Yeah.
moved around so much, and people can definitely learn from you. And I love what you said, like there are no mistakes. And I'm
Mhm.
glad that I know that now as well. But like, even though we know that, we can still beat ourselves up about the things that go
Mhm.
wrong. But yeah, failure is feedback. And I think that the universe takes the path of least resistance. So
Mhm.
sometimes we have to go through the gates of hell to get to the good
Mhm.
bit.
Mhm.
And that's just how it is. Um, but anyway, thank you so much for talking to me
Oh,
today.
it's great.
And you're the first one out of a new set of interviews that I'm going to be doing, talking to extremely interesting people from around the world in my awake community. So, if anybody would like to find out more about Celeste, I'll put underneath the video some info for her, and all the information about me is under the video as well. But thank you so much,
Thank you, Jenny.
and
Bye.
I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks.